Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Calgary Foundation's information session about the Spring 2025 cycle of the Community Grants Program. And happy Lunar New Year to all those who are celebrating. My name is Bessie. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be presenting with my colleagues Ingrid and Dowdy, and we're part of the grants team here at the Foundation. This session is being recorded, and we will post the link to the recording on the Community Grants page on our website. So we would like to start the session with a land acknowledgement by acknowledging that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, Îyârhe Nakoda Nations, the Otipemisiwak Métis government of the Métis Nation within Alberta District 6, and all the people who make their homes in Treaty 7, region of Southern Alberta. We'll now like to take a couple of minutes to watch the Calgary Foundation Land Acknowledgement video.
What is land acknowledgement?
Those of us that are continuing our oral history are blessed. What we shared, that was told from way back.
We were part of the ecosystem. We were not masters of it.
You know, after we grow up from our biological mothers, the earth becomes our caregiver. Everything that we need is there.
We were raised to believe that everything has a spirit, and that everything around us is alive and has a purpose.
The spirit of the land and our spirit. You can't separate land and people.
In Treaty 7 territory, I'm accepted, I'm something, and I'm with my people.
We honor our ancestors by acknowledging Treaty 7 territory. We acknowledge the Treaty 7 nations, the Piikani First Nation, the Siksika First Nation, the Kainai First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. We acknowledge the ancestral territory of the Siksikaitsitapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the home of Métis Region number 3.
So you can find this video on our website in long and short versions. It is meant to be a community resource, and you're welcome to use and share it. Okay, so to start us off, we would like to know who's here with us today and encourage you to rename yourselves and add your organization's name to your name. We also have a quick poll we would like you all to take, just to indicate if you're here representing a registered charity, a nonprofit, or other groups, or you're here as an independent grant writer. So if we can pull that poll up. And so while everyone's taking a moment to fill in the poll, I'll just go over the topics that we'll be covering today. So during today's presentation, we will go over the Community Grants Program overview. We will then look at eligibility, so who can apply and what you can apply for. Then we will look at partnerships and collaboratives, so who can apply for a partnership or a collaborative application and how to do so. And then we will talk about how to apply, the application form with the options of written, video, audio, or oral application. And then we will talk about reconciliation and equity. So who we mean in the application when we refer to equity deserving communities and how we use the data that you provide in the application. Then we will go over the community grants process. So timelines, how applications are assessed, and who assesses them. At the end of this, we will have time for questions and answers. Please use the Q&A function to enter your questions and we will answer them at the end. We will try and answer some simple, straightforward questions in writing as we go along, but we'll mostly address questions at the end. If you have a question that you feel is specific to your organization or proposal, I encourage you to book some time with one of us. A link will be shared in the chat so we can go over it in detail, one-on-one, as opposed to trying to answer it all here. So like I said earlier, this session is being recorded and the recording will be posted on the community grants page on our website. And now if we can share the results of the poll, please. Do we have that?
I don't think the poll actually ran, Betsy. It looks like there's no responses, so maybe it's something we can throw up again for just a minute.
Okay. All right. So apologies for that. Yeah, if we can throw that up again. So while we do that, we can now look at the community grants overview. So the community grants program, we could just move over to, yeah, it covers a broad scope of projects aimed at strengthening the charitable sector and engaging citizens. So over the past few years, we have made some adaptations that reflect the ongoing effects of the pandemic and our commitment to reconciliation and advancing racial equity and systemic change. So the program is open for applications twice a year, the spring and the fall cycle. We are now accepting applications for the spring 2025 cycle, and the deadline for submission is Thursday, February 20th at 4 p.m. We expect that the need for funding will remain significantly higher than our available resources. So we expect to shortlist around 35 to 40% of applications. We have the program guidelines on the community grants page, and it is also linked at the top of the application in the portal. So the program guidelines are quite detailed, and we encourage you to review them before starting an application. And even if you have started an application, to refer to them as you work on your application. And so now we'll look at eligibility. So we have 3 main criteria to determine eligibility to apply for the community grants program. Firstly, the community grants program can only accept applications from registered charities and other qualified donees. So you can go to the CRA's charities listing website to determine whether your organization is a qualified donee. And I think we have a link to that as well. So if you're not a registered charity but wish to apply for funding, you can consider the following options. So make a formal application to CRA to become a registered charity. Our capacity building team here at the foundation does have resources available to help you determine whether applying for charitable status makes sense for your organization. Do note that obtaining charitable status from CRA does take a while, so this option won't be applicable for this particular cycle. You may also establish a formal partnership with a registered charity that you already have a working relationship with and whose mission aligns with yours. So the application will be made in partnership with the charity being the main applicant. We'll discuss partnership applications and implications later in the presentation. And for the second eligibility criteria, we'll look at that. So for the second main criteria, as Calgary Foundation is a place-based community foundation, we support initiatives that will significantly benefit Calgary and area communities, so which include Calgary, Banff National Park, Canmore, Rockview County, the municipal districts of Bighorn, Foothills, Kananaskis, and Whitland, and the surrounding First Nations of Treaty 7 territory. And looking at the third eligibility criteria, so each organization can have 1 current community grant for their own work and 1 to support a partnership or a collaborative. So when applying to support their own work, the charity must have completed and reported on any previous community grant or pandemic recovery grant if that's still active. So when applying in partnership with a nonprofit society or grassroots groups, or as a collaborative of at least 3 organizations, the charity must have completed and reported on any previous community grant that was awarded for a partnership or collaborative. You may have an active grant in another of our granting streams, so maybe the grassroots grant or the major grants, provided that the grant purpose is not related to this new application. So let's go over the charity, non-charity partnerships or collaboratives in more detail. So sometimes charities and non-charities will partner to increase their impact in the community or to extend their reach. So for example, an environmental charity may partner with a nonprofit that has expertise in a particular conservation issue. The partnership enables the environmental charity to further their own conservation mission in an area that they may not have expertise in. Another example is, let's say, an immigrant serving charity may partner with a grassroots nonprofit that provides culturally specific services to a specific immigrant community. So the partnership enables the charity to reach more immigrant populations and allows the non-charity to provide activities and services that might not otherwise be available to that population. Okay, so now I will pass over to my colleague Dowdy, who will go over the eligible activities and what you can apply for.
Thanks, Bessie. All right, so the community grant covers a broad range of activities which fall into 3 categories: existing programming, new and expanding programming, and organization development. Now, you can apply for new and expanded programming or existing programming, which entails salaries, program materials, communications, equipment, as well as space associated with programming and accessibility. Now, for existing programming, it's important to note for groups who are interested to apply for this criteria, you will need your organization's annual operating budget will need to be 4 million or below in order to qualify for this criteria. And when selecting the existing programming, you will also receive additional questions in regards of why funding is critical at this point, knowing that we do not fund ongoing programming, or we do not fund ongoing programming on a renewal basis. Now, another criteria is organization development. We also fund activities that are aimed to support internal or capacity building. So this entails staff wellness strategies, organization assessment, feasibility study, consultant fees, specialized equipment, and many more. Basically, work that will help strengthen your organization, but more importantly, help in delivering on your mission. Now, please note that for any cost associated for hiring a new staff to deliver programming will be associated with new and expanded programming or existing programming. Now, let's talk more about what's ineligible for the community grant program. In terms of ineligible activities for the community grant program, here as they follow. Activities that do not align with the Calgary Foundation stated values, annual events or event series, for example, symposiums, gatherings, and conferences. Research, except from participatory action research. Now, when we refer to participatory action research, here we mean the subject of the research, whether agency or community partner, is the driving nature or driving the direction of the work. So what we need to know here is what is the role of the agency or community partner, and how much power do they have in terms of determining the direction of the research. But most importantly, how will the results of that research be activated into community? Now, another ineligible activity is fundraising activities or a fundraiser's salaries, debt retirement and endowments, and also exclusively religious activities that those include prioritizing or programs or services that require participation in religious activities. Now, it's important to note from time to time, we have funded faith-based organizations work that's aims to support the broader community. An example of this is the food bank. As long as programming or participation in faith-based work is not included in the project and goes beyond the regular service members, this work would be eligible. Now let's talk more about most frequent asked questions for the community grant program. So during this time of year or during this cycle, we receive lots of questions regarding the community grants, and here are some common ones. So the first one, what is the maximum grant amount? Well, there really isn't any prescribed maximum or minimum amount for the community grant program. Rather, we ask organizations to apply for the funding they need to make their project successful, while also keeping in mind that generally the average request for a community grant is between 70,000 to 75,000. Now, doubling those numbers may create a big community grant. Therefore, in some cases, we may have to reduce the requested amount or multi-year requests in order to support more organizations in the cycle. We try to do this sparingly, and we know we typically do not do this often, but we know by doing this, this may hamper the plan, your organization's plans or project. But this may happen during the cycle. Another question that we normally get is how long can the project duration be? And generally, you determine the length of the project, or you can work within your budget. Your application should cover the amount needed to meet the objectives of both the short-term or medium outcome of the project. Generally, in terms of community grant application length, generally request lengths are from 1 year to 2 years. Another question that we receive is when must activities occur? Now, decisions made on the applications will be made on July 1st, 2025. Therefore, all costs incurred after July 1st, 2025 will be covered by the grant. Now, if your project begins before that, that is okay. So long as you have significant levels of funding to cover that portion of the project, that works out well. All right, let's talk more in terms of how to apply. Now, in the beginning of this presentation, Bessie had spoke in depth regarding who's eligible to apply. And therefore, we highly recommend before you start applying to please review the community grants guidelines. And this can be located on the Calgary Foundation's website and particularly on the community grants page. Then your next step is to connect with the community grant associate or grant associate to talk more regarding regarding your initiative. Now, in order to book a meeting with a grant associate, you will need to go on the community grants page in which you can click the booking link. By clicking on the booking link, it will then provide you availabilities of the associate, and then you can determine the time that works best for you to meet with the associate to discuss more about your initiative. Now, please remember this is optional, and we generally recommend this in 2 scenarios. Number 1, this is your first time applying for the community grant program and you'd like to know more. Or number 2, you've applied to the community grant program, you are familiar, however, you have some specific questions about your initiative and want to determine how it fits. Now, the next stage will be how to access the application. And in order to access the application, you can access the application on our community grants page, in which you just need to click on the online portal. Once you've provided your credentials, it will then lead you to the online portal where then you will have access to the application. Now, during this stage, while you're working on your rough drafts or working on the application, it's important to note you have the ability to save a rough draft. Now, in order to save a rough draft, you just simply need to click on the application packet, which will then provide you 2 options, A, to print your document, or B, to print. As well as during this time, we also provide a rough draft review support. Therefore, if organizations are interested, they could email communitygrants@calgaryfoundation.org in which informing us, asking for support to review your application. And then an associate will then review your application and then inform you the application has been reviewed by sending a correspondence through the portal. Again, the deadline for the rough draft review is on February 13th, 2025. And this is also another great opportunity to also signify is during this presentation, Bessie mentioned about partnerships. Now, you can also provide access to other members to view your application. This is very helpful for organizations and partnership applications, as this gives the ability for both the registered charity and non-for-profit to work on the application. Now, let's talk more about the application. So as you start working on the application, you're going to find numerous sections in the application. The first section is what we call the basic question about your organizations. Here, you'll find questions regarding contact information, number of staff and volunteers, board members, as well as your organization mission. Once you've completed that section, we then move to the grant overview. This is where we start asking some specific questions about the initiative you're looking to apply. Now, we'll ask specific questions regarding start date and end date for this project, as well as amount requested for the work, and who this work is aiming to serve, as well as a concise description about the project. Once you've completed that section, you now move to the describe your initiative. And this is where you get to expand and speak about your initiative in depth. In this section, you will first find the rationale. Here in the rationale, we will ask you questions in regards of why do you need funding? And why does this work need to be completed at this time? The next section will be focused on delivery. This is where you provide additional information regarding the activities that will take place in the project. And we highly recommend to provide as much details such as key milestones, key activities that will be happening, key dates for the project, as much information you can provide to let us know how this project will be delivered. Once you've completed that, we then move to the evaluation and success. This is where we ask questions in terms of what do you hope to achieve through the work, and how will you know you've reached the objectives of the work. And the next section is relationships. This is where we want to know who you're working with in the community to support this work. Now, later on in this presentation, we'll speak more in depth regarding the following sections that I mentioned and how these sections are assessed and what type of information we're looking for. Now, as you work through the application, you will then find yourself in the budget section. And it's very important to note that as you start working on the budget section, is that in the beginning of the grant overview, we ask you to provide us the amount requested from the Calgary Foundation and the total cash expense. Those two amounts need to match the total cash expense and amount requested in the budget form. And once you're working on the budget, you'll be also prompted to ask in terms of a single year or multi-year. So you can decide if you want this is a single year request or a multi-year request. And finally, for Indigenous-led organizations or equity-deserving communities, you will have the ability to ask support for an oral application. The deadline for oral application support is February 13th, 2025. I will now pass it on to Ingrid.
Thanks, Dowdy, and hi, everybody. So after the budget section, there's a specific section on reconciliation and racial equity. So first, we're going to ask about your relationship to an equity-deserving community. And if you aren't familiar with that term, equity-deserving communities refer to groups who are marginalized by social structures, who often experience social and financial disadvantages as a result of historic and ongoing systems of oppression. And organizations led by equity-deserving communities can experience barriers to obtaining charitable status and to accessing stable funding. So we get lots of inquiries about how organizations should answer these questions if it impacts their eligibility or their chances of success. So I'm going to provide some more context. One way the Calgary Foundation is trying to do better is by collecting and analyzing data so we know who we are serving through our grants, and we can identify gaps and develop strategies to fill those gaps so that our work is reflective of the whole community. We ask 3 questions in the application that function together to help us understand your leadership, your mandate, who you're serving, and your own practices in regards to equity. So first, we ask about your mandated leadership, and we offer 4 categories for you to choose from. The first one you can choose is called led by and for. If you're choosing this category, it means that your organization has a mandate to serve a specific equity deserving community, that their identity is at the center of your services, and that identity is reflected in your leadership at all levels. So, for example, we recently funded an organization that supports literacy and learning in the East African community. Not all of their volunteers or clients are East African, but they have strong representation from the East African diaspora, and they design their community supports to be most relevant to the people hailing from Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Somalia. So for this reason, we include them in our led by and for data. Another option you can choose is called focused. So typically you choose this category if an equity deserving group is named in your mission, but those community members aren't necessarily reflected in your leadership structure. So I can think of a few disability organizations that would probably fall into the focused category. You can also choose serving. So if you choose this, it means there is a strong representation of marginalized people among your beneficiaries or your members, and you might have really strong or still developing DEI policies and practices, but you don't specifically focus on any particular equity deserving community in your mission. So for example, Calgary Foundation falls into this category. We make lots of grants to equity deserving communities. We have diversity amongst our staff and our volunteers, and we're working hard to build relationships in diverse communities, but we're not specifically mandated to provide service to any particular community. And then the fourth option you can choose is called not specific. And in this case, it means your programs aren't designed with a specific equity deserving community in mind. So for example, I belong to a sports organization that would fall into this category. There's a diversity of people that participate. We're welcoming to everybody, but we don't have specific policies or practices that relate to a particular community. So I would just choose not specific. We do know that these 4 choices can't capture a lot of nuance, and it may not fully reflect your organization. So just use your best judgment, choose what feels right. There's no penalty if you choose a category that doesn't fit our definition. It just means that we might choose to reflect it a little bit differently when we roll up our data. And you can see from the pie chart here that this shows the groups that we funded in our last community grant cycle in the fall. You can see that we support groups across the spectrum from non-specific to led by and for. And then the next question we ask, if you want to go to the next slide, is to identify the communities to which your first section applies. So for the Calgary Foundation's data strategy, we're including the populations that you can see here on the slide. We do recognize that no one has a single identity, so it's possible your organization can fall into multiple categories, but in our form, you can just choose one. So there's a text box to provide a little more nuance if you'd like to do that. We also know there's other forms of discrimination like ageism or sexism and different socioeconomic factors that impact people. The populations that we've reflected here are the groups that we're currently focusing on in our data collection. And then a third question asks you to indicate your practices to help us understand how you're approaching equity in your work. So there's essentially a list of potential practices. And again, feel free to add any nuance in the text box that's provided there. And keep in mind that if you're only checking off 1 or 2 of those practices, it's probably most likely that your organization falls into that not specific category, and that's okay. So I spent a lot of time talking about this because Calgary Foundation remains committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and to supporting organizations to strengthen their own practices in regards to equity and inclusion. Okay, so moving along, the last thing you'll see in the application is an option to sign up for the Community Knowledge Center, or the CKC. This is an online platform that Calgary Foundation hosts for charities and for not-for-profits to showcase their work and to reach out to donors and other community members. There's a directory that's publicly searchable, and then there's also a resource hub that's specific to charities and not-for-profits called the Members Corps. The Members Corner has webinars and workshops and articles that you can explore. And it also signs you up for a newsletter that'll highlight things like granting deadlines. And sometimes I think we offer discounted conference tickets. Your organization does not have to have a profile on CKC in order to submit for a grant. So this is an option, but we think it's a good one for you to choose. It is a different system than our grant portal. So if you have any issues logging on to CKC, you can connect with us and we will direct you to our colleague Kelly, who oversees CKC. Okay, let's talk a little bit about assessing the applications. So Dowdy shared with us the types of questions we're going to ask. And there's so much important work out there. We do have tough decisions to make. So each application is assessed by multiple staff and volunteer committees that consist of community leaders, sector experts, and people with a variety of lived experiences. Our assessment criteria mirror the questions that we ask in the application. So we are assessing your rationale and response. Here, we're looking for your why. Why do you need to do the work? Who's driving it? Why is this the right time? So include details so that it's clear how you decided to use the approach you did. We also want to know that you got input from the community that you're working to serve, and be as specific as you can here. So we're looking for information that's pertinent to what the grant funds will help you to do, and not an overview of your organization's reason to exist. If your organization is moving into an area of work that's new for you, just be sure to share with us about how that connects to your organization's mandate. And then we look at the delivery. So now we understand why you want to work, why you want to do the work you want to do. We look at your plan. So you can use bullet points here to outline the activities and the time frame, and make sure those things connect to what you see in your budget. So successful applicants will have a well thought out plan where you have enough time to be successful and that it's resourced appropriately. Again, the more details, the better. So if you plan to host workshops in the year, how many, how often? Do you need new staff? Do you need new volunteers? Do those people need training? How long will that take? Add as much as you can within the space that's allowed to this section. We should, at the end, have a very good sense of how your time will unfold during the grant period, and also be able to guess what we'll see in your budget. We basically want to know that your organization's ready to hit the ground running, and that you've got a good solid plan. Now we know what the plan is. We also look for your evaluation strategy and the impact that you hope to have. So we're looking for a clear sense of the results you expect and how you'll know if you've achieved what you set out to do. Be sure, if you have one, to include an evaluation strategy or how you'll capture the learnings. This doesn't have to be a complicated system of metrics, but the details you provide here should be contextualized to your organization. So statements like, we're going to collect qualitative data, is probably too vague. We also want to know a little bit about what happens next. So tell us a little bit about the sustainability, how you'll sustain the impact of the grant. So for instance, if you're purchasing a new piece of equipment, do you have a maintenance plan? And then finally, we ask you about your relationships. Here, we're trying to get a sense of how your work fits into the landscape of other organizations working in a similar area. So who are you consulting with, sharing with, learning from? We consider how work complements other groups. So even for internally focused work, like maybe a new software system, have you checked with other organizations that have done something similar? What did you learn? And just so you know, we do provide a list of all the previous grants that we've made through community grants in the last 5 years or so. And you're welcome to search that by keywords. And if you want to connect with one of those groups, we're more than happy to attempt to make an introduction. Alignment with our vital priorities and opportunities to support equity does factor into our decisions, along with all of these other things that I just described. And we try to balance the number of grants we make across sectors and across groups. We consider recent funding and also how impactful our funding will be to an overall project. Community grants in general try to spread funding as widely as possible in the community, and so that we always have room for new to us organizations to apply. The applicants that move forward are the ones that provide specific details, are highly community informed, demonstrate really solid planning, and where the rationale, the activities, the budget, and your outcomes all clearly connect. A note here, if you're using an AI assistant to hone the text, that's totally fine. We want you to use your time as efficiently as you want to, but do keep in mind that we're looking for specific information about your context. It's still your plan, so just make sure that doesn't get lost. Okay, so the timeline. Applications are open now. The deadline is 4 p.m. on February 20th. We expect to receive about 150 applications, maybe more. We won't be able to move forward with all of them. So in the last week of April, applicants will be notified whether their application's shortlisted and moving to the next stage, or whether it's declined. Shortlisted applicants will meet with the Grants Advisory Committee in May and June. The final decisions will be made in late June, and successful applicants will be notified of their decision in early July, with payments flowing after that. So keep that in mind, because we can only cover the expenses that come after our decisions are made. Excuse me. And declined applications will be offered a chance for some feedback and to discuss what to do next. And then finally, if you get that grant and you've gone through the work, you're required to submit a final report. That's also done through our online grant portal. Reports ask you to address learnings. So what did you hope to achieve? What actually happened? What did you learn along the way? And a financial summary of how the grant was used. We do understand that plans change along the way, so we're most interested in learning what you learned. Completion of the report is required for future grants. So a reminder that if you have an existing community grant or even a pandemic recovery grant, you'll need to wrap that up and report on it before you can apply again. If you have questions about reporting, our colleague Matt Blau is available, and his contact information is on our website. Okay, Bessie, I think back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Ingrid. Forgot to unmute there. So that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar. So the team has tried to answer some questions posed using the Q&A function. Please continue to enter any outstanding questions you may have using this function, and we'll do our best to answer the questions live. And remember, do keep your questions around the community grants process, general eligibility, timelines, anything that's, a question that's specific to your own organization or proposal. We ask that you book a conversation with one of us. We're very accessible and happy to discuss your proposal. So we'll just going to open the questions and see what we have open. So there's a question that's asked, regarding the pie chart. So is this fall 2024 community grants pie chart reflecting those who applied or those who received funding? Ingrid, you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah, that pie chart was reflective of who actually received funding, but we do compare who's applying and who's moving forward to make sure that we're not disproportionately moving forward sort of one group or another.
Thanks, Ingrid. So there's another question here from Jennifer asking about their specific chapter and the annual operating budget. So under the existing programming stream, if the chapter budget is below 4 million, does that maintain our eligibility? The total organization budget nationally exceeds 4 million. So Dowdy, do you want to take that one? Sorry, you're on mute. Oh, okay. So sorry, while Dowdy gets that sorted. So the annual operating budget question that we ask does apply to your organization as a whole. So we're not talking about the individual chapters. So if the organization's budget as a whole exceeds 4 million, then that organization will not be eligible to apply for existing programming. So they can apply for something under the new and expanded programming or organizational development.
Thanks, Bessie. Sorry, I was having issues with my mouse and connected to my audio, but thank you.
Yeah, all right, thanks. So the next question, I was wondering what is meant by funding space? Is this rent, capital expenses? Would
Yeah.
that come under the organization development work? Now, do you want to take that one?
Yes, thank you, Bessie. So in terms of space associated programming, this would fall under either new and expanded programming or existing programming. So that would not fall under organization development. Now, when we refer to space associated programming, this, for example, could be rent for the programming that you're working on. Also can be in regards of a capital project with your space, but we need to have a clear understanding of how that project relates to the ongoing program, the programming that you have in that space.
Okay, thanks. And also, just in case you're also referring to the granting room, like the room you have available space that you have to, that you can apply for. So you can apply for, you can apply if you don't have an active grant for your own work. So if you have, let's say, an existing community grant that hasn't been completed and final report hasn't been submitted, then you wouldn't have granting room or space. So, but if we haven't answered that question, please feel free to follow up with us. Okay, so we have another question from Jay. So if we continue the project after 1 year from another funding, will that be okay? So if the other funding is not secured, do we have to give a letter from other funders or promissory notes? So length, Ingrid, who would like to take that one?
So if your intention is to continue the project sort of after Calgary Foundation's grant period with another funder, that's great. We're happy that you have the opportunity to do that. You could share a little bit about that in your in the question around sustainability and impact and evaluation. We don't require you to give a promissory note. In your budget, if you do have multiple potential funders, what we do is ask you to list who those funders will be during the grant period. So it might be you're getting some funding from us and some funding from the Alberta government, for instance, or some from some fundraising activities. You can list all of those things in your budget. And then just make sure that your expenses add up to that same amount. So you don't end up with more money than you plan to spend or vice versa.
Okay, thanks, Ingrid. So there's a question, how do we reconcile needs for existing program and new projects? Ingrid, I think that's you again. New or existing?
Me?
Was that Dowdy? Sorry, I think.
Go Dowdy.
No
Okay.
worries. So the key way to the difference between existing programming and new expanding programming is when we talk about existing programming, we're talking about ongoing programming that's happening. And when we talk about new and expanding program, this is new programming that you're starting or programming that you're expanding. So whether, for example, there's a huge demand and now you're starting to do more programming elsewhere so that you can meet that demand. So that's where the significant difference is between existing and new expanding, where existing is just focusing on the ongoing programming and the new and expanding programming is focusing on whether the project is a whole, start a new, for instance, pilot project or from example, or you're looking to expand the program so that you can support more members in the community.
Thank you. And there's a question from Sue. If our nonprofit organization partners with a charity to develop a series of workshops, do the final workshops belong to the charity or the nonprofit or both? This is a question for delivering future workshops after the development and grant is completed. So it really depends on the agreement between the charity and the nonprofit. So it's what you agree to do. So there are different ways the partnership might work, where the charity is kind of contracting the nonprofit to deliver the work. So then it's still your own work, but it furthers the mission of the charity. So really, it's up to you how you like fashion out that partnership. But feel free to follow up with one of us, and if you want to talk about that in more detail. Okay. Okay. Is there a limit in how many active grants can an organization hold per Calgary Foundation funding cycle? So if this is regarding all of our granting programs, so we have quite a few, you know, from the grassroots grants to major grants, and the DOC strategic opportunity, which is on hold at the moment. But as long as the projects or the proposals are not related, so you can have multiple grants in the various granting streams. But when it comes specifically to community grants, so you can only have one active grant for your work, and then you can have one in addition to that if you're partnering or supporting a nonprofit or grassroots group. I hope that answers that. Is there an organizational budget limit for the new and expanded programming or organizational development stream like there is for the existing programming stream? Dowdy, you want to take that one?
Yeah, thank you, Bessie. So there's no budget criteria for new and expanded or organization development. That only, I would say, budget restraint is only for our existing programming stream. But other than that, our new and expanded or organization development, there's no such thing as budget criteria.
Okay, thank you. So the next one, does it affect the eligibility if this is a national organization? So across Canada, there is an office based in Calgary. So if it's a national organization, that's fine. The only criteria as Calgary Foundation is a place-based community foundation. The criteria is that the work should be significantly benefiting Calgary and area communities. So if you're working nationally, and you probably have funding to cover some aspects of the work that you do maybe in other provinces. It's just that the Calgary Foundation fund, the community grant, needs to go to work that's supporting Calgary and area communities. Is funding available for capital and expansion of a facility? So who's taking that one?
I think that will be me. So there is funding available in terms of whether if you're doing capital projects. However, I would recommend for such questions that to book a meeting so we can have a clear understanding of what you're looking to do so that we can place you in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. I think this might be the last question. So if we had funding last year for a new program that we piloted and it was a big success, but we will not be able to continue it without new funding, will that be considered a new program or existing program? So it would be existing, but I would like you to come discuss this with us. But because it's something that you've already done and now you want to continue that, that would be existing programming, but happy to discuss further. Okay. And I think that's all the questions that we have. Please let me know if I've missed any, team. All done.
Actually, Betsy, we did have one question earlier on during the webinar about eligibility of schools. I don't know if you want to chat about that a little bit, just sort of in general, and then we can book a conversation for more detail.
Yeah, sorry, can you pull that one up? And I think I know, saw that one. Okay, I think there's one more. Can the same previous successful grant be renewed or reapplied for? So we don't renew funding. So you can reapply, and based on what your current situation is, and it will be assessed based on the final report and the work that you've how you're progressing from that work to this one, so you can apply for the same thing. Okay.
So the question around schools was, I'm interested in knowing whether the grant supports creating programs in a newly founded college in Calgary. Specifically, the program would focus on innovative training and a range of trainees, including domestic and international students, and covering secondary schools and post-secondary courses, as well as practical training. So I can speak to that a little bit. Like, that sounds like there's enough nuance there that we should definitely have a conversation more specifically about your organization. But just generally speaking, Calgary Foundation doesn't fund a lot of things within the education system. But schools are eligible. We ask you to go through the school board, whatever that might be, because we don't have the capacity to take applications from every school. The work would have to impact and stay with Calgary. So if it's a matter of training like international students, then probably not. And we don't fund, for the most part, private education facilities, unless there's a specific focus on supporting a community that isn't supported through the public system. So there's some nuance there that I think we need to discuss more. Essie, I don't know if that was a good enough answer, if you want to share anything.
Yeah, definitely more conversation needed on that, but thanks, Ingrid. Yeah, so just the final one, how can we quantify our results success? Any resources that can help with figuring this out? Yeah, we can definitely have more conversation about this, but when we're talking about quantifying results, it could be qualitative or quantitative, both would be great, but really it is what you want to, what you hope to achieve, and how will you know that you've achieved that? So yeah, definitely book a time with one of us, and we can talk more about that. Can a church that is a charity apply for another nonprofit organization? So you can't apply for, so you can apply in partnership with a nonprofit if the work of that nonprofit is actually furthering the mission of your church. So let's say if the nonprofit is providing food, is running maybe its own, like a food bank, and it wants to use the church's premises, for instance, and that helps the church in serving more people in the community. So you won't be applying for them, but you'd be doing that in partnership. Okay. I think that concludes it, and we're just going to the top of the hour. So that concludes our session today. We hope we've been able to provide enough information to support you with your application. And we still encourage you to connect with one of us directly if you want to discuss your proposal. We're very accessible and happy to chat with you about your work. So thank you once again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and looking forward to receiving your applications. So thank you, everyone.